Good morning, everybody. This is a real pleasure for me, but I'm imagining that for you it feels a little bit like going to your college graduation and seeing that your commencement speaker isn't T. Swift or Obama, but rather some moderately successful alum. But hopefully this goes well. So, no, I really appreciate the opportunity. I've gotten to know several of you in the last few years speaking at AFTO and Ecolab's Symposium, and I really look forward to connecting because clearly all of you are in industries and working for organizations that are relevant to my organization and the opportunities that my students go out and take. So, when I was putting together my cover slide, which was originally just a picture of Lincoln, there was a news story on in the background that caused me to add the thought balloon, and that was a story about the latest TikTok challenge craze, which is apparently called the Chromebook challenge. If you thought Tide Pods were ridiculous, the children are taking metal objects, paper clips, sticking them into the USB ports of their school-issued Chromebooks to try to get them to catch on fire or short circuit. And of course, they're using their better technology to record all of this happening. This, for me, is worse than Tide Pods because that's public property. What a mess. Yikes. But the thing is, though, the challenges that we face as leaders in organizations that are staffed by people have to be surmountable. Because what are the alternatives? What are the alternatives to not bringing inspired leadership to groups of people, especially in the world that you work in, where if your teams fail, think of the other things that fail as a result. So I've always been fascinated by the personalities and the experiences and the training that make really exceptional leaders. Leaders who are the first to the solution. Leaders who can outthink, outpace anybody else in the room. Now, there's no evidence that he said this in real life, but the character of Winston Churchill in the show The Crown, any fans? Exceptional. Said, "There is no problem so complex, no crisis so grave that it cannot be satisfactorily resolved within 20 minutes. There are people that I've met, leaders that I've had the pleasure of working for, whose minds work that way. If we can't solve this in 20 minutes, it's not solvable. Leaders who can really see the chessboard, know what move to make right now so that 10 moves down the game, they're where they want to be. It's fascinating to me. I'm not one of those people yet. I'm learning. I'm trying to get there. It's what I want to be. But I'm learning by doing. So, hence the second slide. This presentation is not based on any sort of textbook presentation of leadership. I consulted none of them. I consulted no leadership experts. Because frankly, you all know that in the last few years, the number of what the hell now days that you have as leaders probably makes the textbook not terribly accurate. We're going to throw this right out the door. And all we have at the end of the day then is our lived experiences. And for me, that's been in academia. But beyond that, where in that college or university setting, we're building programming that affects businesses, external communities. At Johnson & Wales, despite national trends, in these food programs, we've grown enrollment, we've grown retention, we've cut our costs by 10%, just in my unit. We've done pretty cool things, and I'm learning along the way. So that's what you're going to get today, is a little bit of just what I've picked up along the way. Look at that. Isn't that fun? I can't tell you that when I figured out how to do that in PowerPoint, how excited I was. And it's really quite simple as it turns out. But I had a 30-year-old looking over my shoulder when I was trying to do it, and even she was impressed. I want to start a presentation about leadership talking about where leadership comes from. This is a thought exercise that I would walk through with my econ or my policy students in my days as a professor, which, by the way, was the best job I ever did. It was the only thing I ever knew that I was really good at. And then I left it to become an administrator. Isn't that what happens? But a little thought exercise. Unfortunately, all of us in this room on some giant ship have just ended up on an uninhabited island. There are resources there, but highly likely that we're not going to get off anytime soon. So we're kind of stuck here. Our goal, of course, is survival. And once we get our wits about ourselves, we figure out that the first thing we have to figure out is how to use these finite resources as efficiently as possible, because there is only so much of them to go around. Efficiency is the first thing to master when it comes to surviving, and I think that's true of organizations too. Over time, what's your name, ma'am? Angela becomes really fabulous at harvesting coconuts. And what's your name? Anna becomes a crack water desalinator. They're figuring things out, and ultimately that focus on efficiency turns to a focus on exchange. We need, for ultimate efficiency, a system where everybody is doing the thing at which they're absolute best at, or the thing for which they give up the least of something else to do. That's Econ 101, absolute and comparative advantage. And what you make can be exchanged with what you make, and all of a sudden we have a barter system. Didn't take long. We had the beginnings of an economy. What comes next? Well, now we're living here. We're worried now about quality of life. How do we make this better? What we have to start doing now is processing, combining, building, growing. We've got to take what we've got and turn it into things that we don't have yet. That takes innovation. That takes ideas. That takes teams. Right? So efficiency yields exchange, and ultimately as a society, we move toward innovation because we have to. The problem is, human beings, even in the worst of circumstances, are not naturally altruistic. They don't naturally look out for everybody else. And so if I'm going to innovate and really figure out how to make something awesome, I need an incentive. I need some promise that what I create is mine. That if somebody benefits from a new coconut harvesting technology that I invented, it's me. We have to have property rights. What is mine is mine. You can't take it. What is yours is yours. Nobody else can take it. All of a sudden, we have the beginnings of a legal system. But because Anna is, you can't trust her. She's a little squirrely. Just because you have property rights doesn't mean we're off to the races. We have to have enforcement of those property rights, and all of a sudden, we have governance. We have a form of government primarily enforcing the basic rules of the game. What is yours, and what is mine is mine. Imagine now what comes next for this society and how much more complex it's going to be. So our coconut harvester here is now pretty pissed at, yes, because you have begun building shelters out of wood, which requires the trees that grow the coconuts that you need. And this one over here has actually started taking the wild island birds, breeding them, making them even more efficient. And so now we have meat birds, but the entire front row hates you because it stinks. There's manure just everywhere, right? It's not just about property rights and innovation anymore. It's about we now have the complex decisions required in a complex society. Think now about the role of leadership, the role of government. I've got to make sure that you continue to do what you do, but that you can't oppress what she's trying to do so much that I get nothing out of her. This requires complex governance. This requires somebody or a group making decisions. And what we can hope, all we can hope, is that whomever is making those decisions is making them toward the general welfare, is making them toward the good of the group, not just the good of Anna, not just the good of the government. And as it turns out, now's the history lesson portion of the day. Is everybody super excited? You guys are food scientists. You have to be excited about history, right? As it turns out, we have a provision in our chartering document, in the Constitution, that provides that, in fact, this is exactly what the American government will do. It is called the General Welfare Clause, Article 1, Section 8. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. This is pretty good, right? It's exactly what we think we're going to need. This isn't easy, though. And in fact, a lot of disagreement among the framers about whether this should be in the Constitution. James Madison thought this is the most dangerous text you could put into a constitution shaping a government, because who knows what scale and scope it would allow government to grow to. You're going to tell me that you will allow leaders to determine what's good for everybody, so that ultimately regulation and spending and policy is almost limitless. Others thought, no, this Constitution has to live across time. You have to give leadership the flexibility to respond to the needs of people 200 years from now, and who knows what that will be. Eventually, the Supreme Court agreed with that more flexible interpretation in the 1930s, during the heat of the Great Depression, when it was very clear that the only thing that can pull us out of this mess is an entity that can spend more than it has, and that's government. That we have to use the public purse strings to get this economy going again, and therefore general welfare is very flexibly interpreted. For you real history wonks, I love this. You know, the Confederacy had a constitution, almost identical to the U.S. Constitution, save for a couple of things. You know what the biggest difference was? It didn't have a general welfare provision. Already by the 19th century, it was very clear that there's a chance that this gives government unlimited scope eventually to spend and do things that impact people's lives. But nonetheless, we have it. The bad news is that even if you have basically a benevolent government that's working on behalf of the general welfare, it doesn't mean there aren't losers. It doesn't mean there aren't winners and losers. And in fact, there's this concept in economics called a Pareto improvement. Vilfredo Pareto, he was an Italian economist. A Pareto improvement is a situation where I do something that makes one person better off, at least, while harming no one. One person's better off while harming no one. Sit and think for a minute and put your hand up if you think that there's a policy in the world that constitutes a Pareto improvement. Good. There isn't one. There isn't one. Everything that the government does toward the general welfare has a loser. Even if we all agree that we should provide health care to disabled and elderly and impoverished people, that's coming out of your pocket. Your wallet is hurt by us treating the general welfare, right? Somebody is harmed. Pareto improvements aren't possible. So all we hope for with good leadership is net gain. Net gain, that every step we take, the benefits are greater than the cost. Every step we take, the benefits are greater than the cost. That's what the General Welfare Clause allows government to do. This is still incredibly difficult, and you understand that this question of how you achieve gains in general welfare is the difference between a modern liberal and a modern conservative. Do we invest bottom up? Do we invest top down? Are we isolationists? Are we globalists? Do we allow free markets? Do we regulate markets? It all hinges on how a leader thinks about general welfare and how we're going to get there. It's even more complicated when you think about the time context. Do we make policy just for the general welfare of you who live now? Or do we need to be making policy for the general welfare of generations to come? Climate change falls into that boat. Do we make policy right now that's going to hurt your wallet and hurt your business's wallet because it's going to help people 100 years down the road? These are big questions, but these are the questions of leadership. And what I'm going to say to you is that even though this sounds like a civics lesson on government, it's a lesson on governance. Governance, whether we apply it to a country, a state, a nonprofit organization, a private organization, you name it. Governance remains the same. Now, I know that we all feel pretty bad about lots of things from a policy and political standpoint of the last few years. But if you really think about it, no matter how difficult it objectively is to create net benefit, always reach toward that general welfare, no matter how difficult that is, we've done some pretty cool stuff in this country since the General Welfare Clause was written by the framers. I love that picture of LBJ signing into law Medicare in 1965. Anybody know why Harry Truman is sitting next to him? Indeed, Harry Truman was the first Medicare beneficiary. Isn't that awesome? The first enrollee in the program. Medicare is an expensive program, but the number of people 65 and older that it 100% keeps out of poverty, I think we could probably say, is a move toward higher general welfare. Our taxes. It wasn't until 1913 that the Constitution provided that the federal government could tax your incomes. That's the 16th Amendment. We hate them. Every April the 15th, I dread it, and I delay as much as I can, and I'd like to have my money, but we built schools. We built public education. We built a space program that had a hand in ending the Cold War, that gives us satellites for telecommunications and weather forecasting, that allows research toward diseases like Parkinson's and cancer. One analyst several years ago said that if the government had kept a 0.1% stake in every business that its primary research led to, we would never have to pay taxes in this country again. Think about just one thing through ARPA and DARPA. These were Department of Defense projects that ultimately led to what we know as the World Wide Web. Imagine a 0.1% equity stake in everything that the web generated since then. You'd never have to pay taxes again. We bought some pretty cool stuff. Doesn't mean there wasn't losers. We pay big taxes, but we bought some stuff. We've done pretty good. World War II is the same thing. 400,000 people died on the American side, but it fundamentally resurfaced the world and how the world communicates and works with each other, which saves lives. So, if making move toward general welfare, higher general welfare, is difficult, it's becoming more difficult. I'm going to talk about these things on a larger context, but all of them are at play in your organizations too. The first thing is, I think, as Americans, we're more individualistic than we've ever been in our history. Our very economic system, our culture is built around individualism, that if I succeed, that's on me. If I'm rags to riches, that's on me. If I pull myself up by my bootstraps and make big things happen, that's on me. This icon of the self-made man, that's America. That's the American dream, right? The thing is, though, that's a solitary pursuit. And it comes at the expense of how we value community and how we value the collective good. I know some of you in the audience right now are thinking, God, is he a communist? No. I'm not. But there's a lot of evidence right now that current teenagers, kids growing up right now, are actually being raised to prioritize individual achievement more than caring for others. That's the marker of success. And I got to tell you, there's something to be said about the media content that we're making now. Most media content, TikTok, Facebook Reels, whatever these things are. You know what they're of usually? They're of myself. All right? I'm going to mention them anyway here in a second, so I might as well already embarrass myself. My job is hard some days, and when I get home, I cook dinner, and I like watching incredibly stupid television because I don't have to pay attention to it. One of my favorites is The Real Housewives of whatever. Doesn't matter. Whatever. And, they all have their little intro sequences, and one of them says, now at this point in my life, I'm marketing the most important thing I've ever marketed, me. You feel it when you look at your media feeds, right? The camera is on me. I will make it. And the data suggests it too. In 2018, 16% of Americans reported that they felt very attached to their local community. 1972, 45% of Americans felt they could reliably trust their immediate neighbors. That fell to 30% by 2016. In 1999, that was not long ago, I was 19 and very good looking. In 1999, 70% of Americans reported that they belonged to some religious organization. That's 1999. In 2023, that was 47%. We're untethering ourselves from community. We're untethering ourselves from the needs and concerns of other people. Let me ask you something. Politically, how do you make policy that benefits the collective, the general welfare of the nation, if all everybody's concerned about is this, is me? How much bold policy have you seen in the last 10, 20 years that actually created big, common, good gains? You know why? Because if I do something as a senator and I cast a vote that hurts your wallet in a big way because it benefits everybody else on this side of the room, you will vote me out of office tomorrow. And I've got colleagues in the Senate that'll help you do it. All right? This is toxic, and it's individualism. No context. I skipped one, but I'll go back to it. One of the things that I think makes it difficult to achieve these gains in general welfare is that nobody has any context anymore. Nobody knows history anymore. The U.S. citizenship test has been in place since 1986. It's 100 questions, 10 are randomly selected. The respondent answers 6 correctly to pass. 6 out of 10 to pass. The pass rate as of 2022 for immigrants taking this exam was 96%. Do you know what the pass rate is for American citizens under the age of 45? 20%. Listen to this. 13% can tell you when the Constitution was ratified. 50% can't tell you which countries we fought in World War II. And this one's pretty stunning. 25% can tell you why we fought a war against Great Britain. The nation's report card, our educational standing, came out just a few months ago. It showed that 13% of students were proficient in U.S. history. 68%, only 68% of 8th graders say they've ever had a class focused in U.S. history. Only 7 states require civics education in middle school, and this one makes me sad. A 2020 RAND survey of civics teachers found that 40% thought it was important that students learn about the Civil War and the Cold War. We have no context anymore. How do you make policy toward better, improved general welfare if people have no idea how policy works, what has historically been effective, have no idea where problems even come from? If we're trying to solve major challenges like poverty and healthcare, wouldn't it be nice to know what those problems in poverty and healthcare look like? I used to tell my students a little parable of a farmer who was concerned that all of his chickens were dying. And so in order to figure out what was going on, he went out to the coop, picked up a hen and broke her neck, and sent it into the extension agent to assess. got a letter back from the extension agent that said, cause of death, broken neck. If we don't understand the context of problems, how do you solve them? We also, of course, are living in a time, as you know, where fact does not equal fact. Fact does not equal fact. Just last week, and some of you may have seen this in the news. By the way, are any JWU alums in the audience? Okay, there's only a handful of you, so I can talk about these things. Last week, Johnson Wales and the leaders at the university had to carry out very, very difficult stuff. We actually terminated 90 positions at the university, facing stark budget realities. That story, of course, made its way to the media. The comments on that story suggesting what people thought was fact about what happened. My favorite was that this is really stupid because 90 people's salaries altogether don't even total up to what the chancellor makes. That's not true. But that's not true in the least, not even close. But the number of people who continued with that thread and whom I bet are wandering around in Providence, Rhode Island right now, repeating that to other people. You know this is what's happening in your friend groups. This is what's happening in your place of work. How do you make policy that's good for everyone, that improves the lot for everyone, if we can't even agree on what reality is? And finally, we're more connected globally than any time in history. What happens in your country can impact my country. We knew this in the 1950s and before. In the 1950s, we struck on our Food for Peace program. We had surplus commodities in the United States owned by the Department of Agriculture, and we're going to take them out to the world and help feed people. You know what the secret point of Food for Peace was? I need to get to the hearts and minds of the poorest and most vulnerable people in the world, because if I don't, the communists will. This was a step toward winning the Cold War. Now, the globe is more connected than ever. You can build a bomb in your country and it end up in my country. You can make a decision in your country that implodes my country's economy, all right? Building policy for the general welfare, more difficult than ever, in part because it now includes consideration of literally every other country in the world. I may have to spend your tax dollars over here for the general welfare of home, for the general welfare of the United States. Now, this isn't a civics presentation, but as I said, you face the same challenges. Your leadership mindset, no matter the organization you represent, should be the same, that the decisions that you make should be toward the general welfare. But whose? Well, there's few options. It could be toward your general welfare, the boss. That doesn't work. It never works. If it works for only a moment, then it all falls apart. Don't even think about it. I'd argue that we're not even working toward the general welfare of our shareholders in the long run. If we are a publicly owned entity, look at the Berkshire Hathaway model. Anybody own Berkshire Hathaway stock? We should talk. Okay, well, if you bought Berkshire Hathaway stock in 1990, you'd have paid $7,500 a share. If you bought it yesterday, you would pay $770,000 a share. Woulda, shoulda, coulda, right? Berkshire Hathaway is the largest holding company in the world. What it does is it goes and seeks out other companies that have paid dividends in the past. They've been profitable in the past, but the market tide has turned. They've had poor leadership. They need investment and oversight to grow again. They go and buy up companies and manage them to success. That's what they do. Berkshire Hathaway does not pay dividends. It's incredibly profitable. You know what it does with those gains? It rolls them right back into the companies that they're trying to fix, right back into the companies that they hold. The philosophy being, why would you as a shareholder value a short-term dividend over long-term growth in the price of the asset that you own? That's the model. And I'm telling you that many, many corporations, to get short-term favor with their shareholders, have sold the company up the river. It's happened time and time again. This is not your constituency, and nor are your employees. This is the trap that I fall into. I'm going to tell you, I am a casual leader. I love having personal connectivity with my team, with my faculty, with my staff, with my directors. That can get me in trouble, because if I'm making decisions toward the general welfare of just my employees, you know what they want? They want more money, and they want an easier job. If everybody on the team gets those things, the organization will exist for about a week, and then it's done, and nobody has a job. I'm looking out for the general welfare of the organization. The organization. And just as in federal governance, when I'm trying to increase the general welfare of my organization, some decisions that I make will have losers. Some decisions that I make will have losers. That is the essence of your job as a leader, to decipher what gets us to the next scale of general welfare. And in making that decision, you are determining who the winners are and who the losers are. All right. So this is tough, but before I get to the really good news, I'm going to tell you that there's some other challenges that you're dealing with in your organizations too that might not be so apparent in governing an actual country. The first one we're all familiar with and probably tired of talking about is COVID. But think about the thing that COVID did. COVID fundamentally changed the work-life balance calculation for a lot of people. People who no longer had to hop in a car, put on actual pants, go to an actual office, and just wait the day out. They didn't have to do that anymore. I can take a meeting, go feed my cat, I can do other things, whatever. It gave them a glimpse of what life might be like if I weren't anchored to a desk at my office for 8 hours a day. And you know what they decided? This is better. In the work-life balance calculation, COVID caused life to win. And now the idea that we might have to tether back to this thing that detracted from my quality of life, it's a tough sell. The other thing that's happening with the people that work with you and work for you is this sense that I just can't keep up. I just can't keep up financially. The dangerous thing about that sentiment is that what it's doing in their heads is unhooking the connection between work and reward. Why am I working? Why am I doing extra if I'm paddling upstream all the time, every day financially? When you unhook the relationship between work and reward in a capitalist society, in a market economy, the whole thing falls apart. You know, the truth is, wages have kept up with inflation on average. Since 2020, wages have risen 22% on average, while the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, has gone up 21%. Technically, wages are outpacing prices. So why do we feel the way that we feel? Well, the problem is the CPI is an index of a lot of goods that we buy. The goods that are most apparent to us, the ones that hit our wallet every day, housing and food, have had significantly more inflation. In 2022, food prices went up almost 10%, and another 5.8% in 2023. By the end of 2024, American home prices struck a record high for 15 straight months. In 2024, about half of Americans who were renting were spending more than 30% of their incomes on rent. And so inflation is hitting us where it's visceral, where we see it and feel it every day, even though the aggregate numbers tell us we're probably doing pretty good. Here's the big problem. We don't stop spending. We don't stop spending. Think about the market basket of things that your great-grandparents needed in the early 20th century. It's literally food, shelter, and clothing. And that house probably didn't even have plumbing. Certainly didn't have a telephone, and you didn't have a car in the driveway. Middle of the century, with suburbanization, I have to have a car, and GE and all of these companies are putting out fabulous innovations that help me keep food cold and cook my food in my house. I've got ready-to-go appliances. The market basket of things I need to live just expanded hugely. Think about the expansion of that basket by the end of the 20th century into the 21st century. Most of you, if not all of you, would say that your entertainment and communication technologies are as much necessity as the roof over your head. Go to an airport. Observe people. If they do put their phone down, it's but a second, and you can see just how disturbed they are by not having that stupid thing in their hand. Pick it right back up. I don't know what they're doing. What are you doing? I'm a patient guy, but if I'm behind you in an airport, I don't care if I've got to get to my gate or not, and you can't walk a straight line because you will not put the stupid phone down. I am a kind guy. Thank you. God, how sad is it going to be if that's the only thing you guys clap for in this presentation? But these things that are now completely, we can't do without them. Do a math problem with me. The median household income in the United States last year was $81,000. If you've got 3 people in your household, 2 parents and a teenager, and you're paying for 3 phones with unlimited data, plus household internet, plus a variety of streaming services, you will spend 7% of your gross income on entertainment and communication. 7%. Your grandparents didn't spend 7% of their incomes on communication and technology. The market basket of things that we now have to live is bigger. We haven't stopped spending. And think about the social influences on that. I bring up the Real Housewives of whatever again. Reality TV has basically said it's demystified wealth, right? These people don't have any talent. They don't have any manners. They can't get through a dinner without throwing food and water. You know what that says to the viewer? Well, then I shall be rich too. I'm just like them. I shall have the things I want too. I shall shop on Poshmark or whatever, and I shall have my things. What it's done is driven us into debt. It's driven us into debt. So household debt in the United States is up 22% since 2019, and it stands at about $19 trillion. $19 trillion. Just shy of 50% of us carry credit card balances. Income disparity doesn't help either. Listen to this. The top 20% of income earners in the United States hold 52% of the income. The top 5% hold 24% of the income. The bottom 40% of earners take in 12% of the income. Keeping up with the Joneses is more impossible now than ever because of what you have that I don't. But it doesn't mean we ain't trying. We're spending ourselves into oblivion, and these are your employees. This is what they are walking into work with, among other things. And it drives home this idea, I don't know why I'm working anymore. I just can't keep up. I just can't keep up. We also, of course, just have the amount of time we immerse ourselves into these technologies, which so much data suggests that if I double the time that I'm spending on the internet, at social media, the incidence that I experience of isolation and loneliness and depression goes up. It's a pandemic among our young people, these 13 to 17-year-olds, 99% of whom are on some social media and say it would be near impossible, if not impossible, to give up. Even if, by the way, this stat floored me. Some of you may know that in 2022, we had in the United States for the first time a suicide and crisis hotline, the 988 hotline. 2022 to May of 24, the hotline took in 10.8 million calls or texts. The number that it took in May of 24 was 80% higher than the number it took in May of 22. Even if your employees or your colleagues aren't isolated or depressed or just hooked on their phones, the truth is they're bringing their personal lives into work with them. Used to be the case that your personal life came into work when you got a call that your kid was sick at school and you had to go pick him up, but that was it. All day long now. Ding, 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 ding. Notifications, posts, text, calls. Your employees, your colleagues are half-minded at work, half-minded on everything else going on in their lives. And so even if they're not mentally anguished, they are for sure distracted. For sure distracted. All of these things make organizational leadership incredibly difficult. I had a picture of an AI thing up there. That's the last problem I'll point out to you. Some of your employees are wondering if they'll have a job next week, because every day the advances in what this technology, this suite of technologies is doing and can do, many of it for good. I mean, my goodness, the great things that we can do without expending a ton of human energy, that's awesome. But your employees are weighed down by this a little bit. I know mine are. Even in academia, we are worried about what this does to the need for human intellectual capabilities. Some of your team is worried about the same thing. So what in the world do I do as a leader then? Here's the good stuff. Finally, right? This is hard. You're never going to get it exactly right. Some days you'll fail miserably. But I think if you can do this exercise as a starting point, you've at least engaged the battle. I think you have to look in a mirror and be super honest with yourself. And first say, not, why does my organization exist? Why must my organization exist? And then you get super honest and say, why my position exists? Nope. Why must my position exist? If you believe with all of your heart that your organization is doing something that another organization cannot do, and that as a leader, you're making decisions that others cannot and would not make, and the organization would be worse off without you, that's a starting point. If you can't honestly say those things to yourselves, we have more fundamental problems. We have more fundamental problems. But if we can get past this, we live it every day. We live it every day. I remind my organization and my team with my actions of why I'm inexpendable. I am in the trenches every single day, trying to be that guy who can solve a problem in 20 minutes or less. That guy who's the first to the big idea. That guy who works his tail off to inspire others to do the same. Every day, living it. All right, so now we're back on this shipwrecked island, and I think we're doing quite well. Unfortunately, the islanders have killed Anna, because really your business was just causing lots of problems. But we've all moved on. Yes? We didn't kill her. She's fine. She's right here, okay? But it's the same principles when it comes to just in a list what I think makes good leaders, what I think good leaders do working toward the general welfare of their organization. So that's the first thing. Survival requires that we remind ourselves, this is what I'm working toward. It's not my own well-being. It's not my employees' well-being. It's not my shareholders. It is the organization as a whole. Tactical planning versus strategic planning. Don't raise your hands because some of you have bosses in this room. But how many of you think that organizations spend way too much time on this thing we call strategic planning? Since there's only one or two alums in the room, I'll tell on Johnson & Wales just a little bit. I'm going to read you the headlines of Johnson & Wales' current strategic plan. You ready? It's super interesting. Advance an educational experience rooted in excellence. Strengthen industry connections. Build a strong institutional foundation. And foster a culture that advances our mission. No shit, right? A strategic plan is reasserting why an organization must exist. So can we not just do that and move on to how we're actually going to do it? What that strategic plan basically says is we're going to attract and educate students in a way that allows us to keep the lights on. Period. Now, there's a lot that has to happen to make that happen. That took a year. That took a year. I can't tell you how many meetings I sat in hiding my face the entire time. Lord, do we really have to do this much? Tactic is where the rubber meets the road. Tactic is how we achieve these big things we want to achieve. It's how we be the organization we know we must be. Tactic is where every single day we're deciding which levers to pull, who are the winners, who are the losers, toward the organization's general welfare. And as a leader, you do need to be involved in tactical planning. Not micromanaging, you can delegate, but you need to flex your creative muscle, your inspired creative muscle in informing those tactical conversations. It's the quickest way to earn credibility. It's the quickest way to earn credibility among your employees is to be in a room where you can be the first in a group to figure out the idea, how we're going to do this and how we're going to get it done. Clarify and justify. When I say that, I mean clarify and justify our processes, our expectations, and our priorities. Especially if you're dealing with young employees, they are scared to death. This generation is risk averse. And if you're not establishing clear expectations and measuring their progress all along the way, they're going to freak out a little bit. They're going to waste time worrying about whether they're doing what you want them to do. You have to clarify that up front and have these check-ins to say, you're doing well, here's what you could do better. But you have to do the same with your own processes. The modern worker does not take well to, here, do this because just do it. No. Do this and do it this way, and here's why I want you to do it this way. If you're dealing with employees that are already questioning the value of work, they're certainly going to question the why we do things certain ways. And if you can't articulate why we do things certain ways, maybe you're doing them the wrong way to begin with. Maybe you haven't, as an organization, really thought about whether we need to do these things or not at all. So clarify and justify. Think Pareto. Remember I said that in policy, Pareto improvements aren't possible. It's not possible to make somebody better off without hurting somebody else. I think it is in organizations. I think in your businesses, I think in your nonprofit organizations, I think it is possible to do things that make at least part of that organization or a person better off without harming somebody else. Those are the first order things that we do. That's the gold standard of moving toward general welfare, is to figure out where those Pareto improvements are. For exchange, you are the head loop closer. This is the essence of my job. This is the essence of any leader's job. Somebody has to start and end a conversation. If I start it, or if somebody on my team starts it, I think it's my responsibility to check back in, to loop around. Did that get done? Did that conversation happen? Did that meeting happen? I use my Outlook calendar not just for meetings. I put reminders of myself to remind people about things and reminders to myself to check in on things. And honestly, I think more than anything else I do, that's what early on, as a non-culinarian, as a non-chef, walking into basically the largest culinary school in the country, is what convinced my team, my faculty, that no matter my background, we're here to get good things done, is I was a loop closer. For me, in my heart, I'm a culture maker, most importantly. And that has to do with exchange, too. I want a team that wants to work for me, that wants to be at work, no matter all of this stuff that's going on culturally and in their heads. They feel safe working where they're working. They see a future where they're working, and the leader's job is to set that culture. I think culture is more important than tactic. Tactic is more important than strategy. I think it's perfectly fine to be casual with your team, but I think it's essential to be kind. I wish I had said this, but this is actually from Indiana Governor Pritzker's speech at a recent commencement ceremony. The best way to spot an idiot: look for the person who is cruel. When we see someone who doesn't like us or live like us, the first thought for most is rooted in fear or judgment or both. That's evolution. We survived as a species by being suspicious of things we're not familiar with. In order to be kind, we have to shut down that animal instinct and force our brain to travel a different pathway. Empathy and compassion are evolved states of being. They require a mental capacity to step past our most primal urges. When someone's path through this world is marked by cruelty, they have failed the first test of an advanced society. They never force their animal brain to work past its first instinct. And so, listen to this, their thinking and problem solving will lack the creativity and imagination that the kindest people have in spades. One thing universally true: the kindest person in the room is often the smartest. How many of you have been inspired by a leader who sees the chessboard, deciphers right and wrong, makes great decisions, and at the end of the day, somehow is still incredibly kind and incredibly giving? I hope all of you. It changes your life. It changes your perspective on your organization and what it is to work for them. How can they possibly be that sharp, that decisive, knowing sometimes they have to make decisions that cause winners and losers, but they are kind? I don't think there's a way to earn credibility with your team quicker and better and just more authentically than being kind. So I think that we're culturally dealing with a time when people do not respect authority for a number of reasons. That's disastrous potentially. If people believe they don't have to do the things that their bosses or their leaders are telling them to do, what's the end result of that? I think the quickest way to earn that back is being kind in your role as a culture maker. You have to be an input seeker. You've got to be somebody who relies on your team. You can't make these decisions alone. Remember that you've got to invest in your team for them to be innovative. Remember Berkshire Hathaway. They find these companies that have proven themselves profitable at some point, and they roll resources into them. I think right now, more than wages and money, it's professional development. If you've got members of your team that are really killing it, they've got big ideas, why don't you actually permit them to do professional development in the way they want to do professional development? Even if it's learning something that's not directly related to the organization itself. Allow them to grow. Allow them to promote. Allow them to build their skill set. That's how we compensate employees who are making big moves. Reward big ideas with access. Reward big ideas with access. You've proven yourself part of this team. Be part of this team. And finally, the inspiration. But don't forget that if you're inspiring better culture, you're inspiring the workplace, you can't cut yourself out of your own inspired experiences. You need to surround yourself with inspirational people to keep your fire stoked. Finally, I would say that there's no place in our market, in our economy, in our culture, where it's more important that leadership happens in a way that's productive, where we're minding the store for the general good, than in food and food businesses. As you all know, the quality and safety and nutritiousness of our food is connected to every single aspect of our lives. Food is some of our greatest joy. Food also determines how long we live sometimes and how healthy we are during that life. I think that the room for innovation, now on our island we're limited, but the room for innovation in the food economy is limitless. And that innovation takes leadership. Heart disease is still the #1 killer of adults in the United States. 1 in 5 deaths is heart disease. A lot of that is related to what we're eating. We all know what's happening in our school food, in our school lunch programs. 95% of those school lunch administrators say, I don't have enough money. I can't rely on supply of certain commodities enough. I've actually got kids in debt to the school district because they can't pay for their lunch. There's a stigma around free lunch, and so these kids are just not eating. On and on and on. This is where good food habits can be built, is in school, if we really care about what's happening on those trays. Think about the number of ways your supply chains have had to resurface since COVID. That was a shock to the system that changed everything, at least momentarily. Think about the shocks that might come when we have to resurface our global food trade patterns because of tariffs, because of policy moves. This whole thing could resurface. And in the background, you always have this interest in shorter supply chains and making that food as localized as we can. We've still got products that we depend on in our daily diets that cause massive problems environmentally. That's eutrophication in a body of water. Growing corn and soybeans up and down the Mississippi River Valley, that's what happens in the Gulf of Mexico when all of that nitrogen and phosphorus gets down there. We've got problems. That last picture is my take on some hospitality experiences that I've had in the United States in the last 10 years. Travel abroad. Seriously, do this. Travel abroad. Take note of how you're treated when you go to an airport, to a hotel, to a restaurant, or you ride in a taxi and then come back to the United States. You may want to go back. The state of the American hospitality industry, because of all of these cultural forces where employees who, I don't know why I'm even working, can't get ahead, unengaged, my boss isn't inspiring, he's not even kind. That's what you're running into. All of this, though, is opportunity. All of this is where innovation has to happen to make this better, to make our food healthier, safer, more accessible, and to feed kids the things we should be feeding kids. That's innovation that requires leadership. Your day-to-day jobs, the things that you do to keep people safe and to make American food the safest food in the world, it can't falter. It can't fail. If it does, disastrous consequences. And making sure that every day these organizations we work for are propped up and growing and improving, and their welfare is getting bigger and bigger and better and better. It takes leadership. It takes leadership. I hope this was helpful to you. I sat in on a session this morning. This is very different from the other things that you guys are talking about, but I hope you found some relevance in it or at least laughed a couple of times. Thank you.